Hello, Philos Catholic, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Rome. We are missing my co-host, Simone, today, but we are making up with it with another special guest, David Moss, who is the president of the Association of Hebrew Catholics. David, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here with you, James.
It's great to have you here. I think for our listeners, most of them wouldn't be familiar with the Association of Hebrew Catholics. I know I certainly wasn't when I first started getting involved with this work, but I discovered them over the last year or two, and it looks like you guys are doing a very niche but important thing within the Catholic Church. So could you explain what is the Association of Hebrew Catholics, and how did you come to get involved?
Okay. Well, let me just say that the association was launched by Elias Friedman, a Carmelite friar in Israel. He was born in South Africa, became a medical doctor, and during the war he had an experience of Jesus as a medical doctor in 42 or 43, and he became Catholic, and Jesus inspired him to become a Carmelite priest, and he went to England to be a priest. He went to England, picked up a book in a bookstore written by St. John of the Cross. He read the whole thing right there in the bookstore and decided to become a Carmelite friar. And after his formation in 1954 or 55, he went to Stella Maris Monastery in Haifa, Israel, where he stayed for the rest of his life. In 1979, based on a lot of reading and talking, communications, conversations, research, study, he and a fellow named Andrew Scholl, who was a Holocaust survivor, launched the Association of Hebrew Catholics. And the purpose of the association, that was in 1979, was to preserve the identity and heritage of Jews within the Catholic Church, the community of Israel within the Catholic Church. Now, we've had a lot of conversations. I don't know how much time you want to spend on that, about the pros and cons of doing that. But for us, Jews who have become Catholic, there's no question that our covenant with God continues, as has been reaffirmed in Vatican II, in Nostra Aetate, in the Catechism. But for almost 1,800 years, when you got baptized, you were a new creation, a new man, and therefore being a Jew is no longer relevant, except as a story to bring other, in evangelization. But of course, the culture and everything that God gave the Jewish people were all legitimate, and they were to be fulfilled by Jesus and his church. But that doesn't mean they were supposed to be discarded. They were a way of life, a series of values and ethics. So the whole point of the association was to begin to gather the Jews who were in the church and begin to work together to see how we could form this Israelite community to preserve our identity, to preserve our heritage, and to continue on the vocation that God gave to the people of Israel. Now, we don't call ourselves, some people call themselves Jewish Catholics or Catholic Jews. Words are very flexible. But for us, the reason we use the term Hebrew is because the covenant that is eternal was established by God with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob is 12 tribes, because his name is Israel. So we're all the children of Jake. We're all Jake's children, right? So
that's great.
That's been our and the interesting thing is, the whole issue of evangelization, what it means to evangelize, what it means to witness, has been a topic of conversation since Vatican II. And we do not actively evangelize. Our purpose is to restore the identity and heritage of Jews in the church. But the interesting thing is that now that the Jews are beginning to see through dialogue and the changes that came about from Vatican II, that they don't have to lose their identity. They don't have to give up many of their prayers and religious practices and celebrations to enter the Catholic Church, because they discover Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God.
Right.
They're coming in because they see us. We're a witness to that. They see that we can do these things. And the interesting thing here in St. Louis, our director of theology is a man named Dr. Lawrence Feingold. He's a professor of philosophy and theology at Kenrick Glennon Seminary here in St. Louis. And every year he's a Hebrew Catholic. He and his wife are Hebrew Catholics. every year he holds a Passover Seder in his house with 20 to 25 seminarians, which I come and I lead. And this is the first time that most of these men have ever experienced a Passover Seder. Now, it's fulfilled in the Mass, and we know that. But it doesn't take away the joy and the meaning of the Passover itself. And so there have been people who criticize and say, well, didn't the Passover look forward to the coming of the Messiah? And I said, yes, it did.
Right.
So if the Messiah has come, then you're, by celebrating the Passover, aren't you saying it hasn't come? You're still looking? The answer is no, because the Seder is primarily, first and foremost, the celebration of the Exodus from Egypt, right? And yes, they were looking forward to the Messiah. Yes, the Messiah has come, but he's also coming a second time. So what we got to do is fix the words, and we're looking forward to the second coming of Messiah, not the first.
Right.
So there's nothing in the scriptures or in church doctrine that says we shouldn't practice the heritage that we've been given by God, but we have to make sure that it conforms to the doctrines of the church, the teaching of the Magisterium. And most of the narrative for 1800 years has been that once you become a Catholic, once you're baptized, none of that matters anymore, which of course we don't accept that. But that's never been a doctrine. That's just been an explanatory narrative, which was not right.
Yeah. Well, the point you're making about people who would be upset about celebrating the Passover or having a Seder Passover, it's almost like when Protestants say, why would you do Lent and do the whole, like, the passion and death of Christ, because the resurrection happened already. So, like, just focus on the resurrection, the ending of it all. But there's something about living through that kind of embodied experience that helps you to relive in a certain way salvation history through your own experience. And I think the Seder, the Passover, yes, we have the Mass, but also, if anything, as Catholics, I know the Passover, the Seder meals that I've been to, or even if it was just a Shabbat dinner, even, it would be, there'd be this renewed appreciation for the Mass because of that, because it kind of puts me in this historical place too. And you can do that without, like, affirming that it, like, returning to it in terms of, like, a liturgy, because there's something liturgical about it, but you're not using it to overrule what you believe about in the Mass too. So I think it's a deeply beautiful supplemental way too, just for, like, beyond anything else, it's a way to come appreciate what you already believe in a deeper, more historical, embodied way as well.
Right. And they're like sacramentals. They're aids to the faith, like little procedures, little celebrations. I remember when my sister, she's Mother Miriam of the Lamb of God, Rosalind, when she was an evangelical Christian, one of the criticisms of the evangelicals, because she tried for years to get me out of the Catholic Church before she was going to John MacArthur's church in California. And one of the challenges was, well, why do you have the corpus, the Christ on the crucifix? He's risen, right? So, I mean, you get all these kinds of things that you got to deal with. And there are many Jews who have come to know about Jesus through the Messianic Jewish movement, which is essentially a version of Protestant Christianity. Yeah. But they've never heard the gospel as seen through Catholic eyes, because Catholicism, I mean, before I converted, I was hostile. I hated Catholicism because I knew the history. I knew the relationship. And so that's the case with them. And when they see us, they say, oh, how can you be Catholic in the light of this, in the light of that? And so we explain it to them. You know, some of it's misunderstanding, some of it is sin, some of it is all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Just because you're a Catholic doesn't make you a saint immediately. You got to reach that point, you know. So, but just like Jews, they're holy Jews, but they're not necessarily saints yet, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. So Elias Friedman started it back in the 70s and end of the 70s. When did you come to become a part of the Association of Hebrew Catholics? When did you take on a larger role with them? Because you've been the president now for several years, correct?
1993. Yeah. So I've been doing this since then. Well, I entered the church in 1979, the very year that the AHC was founded. My wife,
Very
from an
nice.
Episcopal background, entered the church 1979. I didn't know her then.
Mm,
And that was the first year of John Paul's pontificate, who was fabulous with
beautiful.
respect to the Jewish people.
Right.
So after I entered the church, I was going to a local mass, local parish, and the booklets. I didn't know anything. Let me just say, I had spent I had my bar mitzvah when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
By 14 and a half, I became an avowed atheist because I
Mm,
looked at the people who believed, Jews, and I grew up in Brooklyn in an Italian and Jewish neighborhood. I
yeah.
looked at Italians and I looked at Jews. I looked at what they did in worship and prayer and synagogue and church. And then I looked at how they
Mm-hmm.
lived, and it seemed to me they weren't connected at all. And I said, you know
Yeah.
what? This is just a celebration of different times of their life. It means nothing. There is no God. How could there be a God in a Holocaust? How could there be a
Yeah.
God in all this stuff? So I spent the next 23 years in different colleges looking for the purpose and meaning of life. And I was married to another woman. I had 3 children. We adopted one. And then in 1970, I was a manager. I worked for IBM for 28 years.
Mm,
And in 1978, I was I had looked for meaning and purpose, and I had studied philosophy and liberal arts in all those colleges, and I couldn't find it. And I was despaired, and I was ready to take my life. I said, "What's the
wow.
point? If I'm just dust of the universe, what's the
Right.
point of all this struggle? It means nothing." And so I remembered my elders praying in the synagogue, and I looked up and I said, "God, if you exist, I need to know now."
Mm-hmm.
God answered my prayer right then. All I could see was clouds, and then I was back in my office at IBM, and I was a completely
Mm,
changed person. I knew there was a God. I knew the meaning and purpose. I didn't know what the meaning and purpose of my life was, but I knew that there was meaning and purpose because
right.
God existed. And
Yeah.
then I knew something that a good Jewish boy would not even talk about. I knew that Jesus was the Son. That's infused
Mm,
knowledge. I had never studied it. I didn't know
wow.
anything there. And
Yeah.
so, uh, I started going to taking RCIA classes at a Franciscan monastery in Beacon, New York.
Mm-hmm.
1979, over 2 days, I celebrated 4 sacraments and entered the
Wow.
church. Yeah, my feet never touched the ground. It was just
Yeah.
unbelievable. And that caused, my wife was a Baptist, and that caused us to fall apart. And
Mm,
eventually we got divorced. I think it was
yeah.
1986, something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
but meanwhile, 1979, I started trying to learn the faith, and so I was going to parishes, getting these little booklets because I didn't know, I didn't know anything,
Right.
and the booklets that were there were terrible. They were just terrible. If that
Mm,
was true, I would have nothing to do with Catholicism. These were Catholic booklets.
yeah.
So I
Was
started
it?
writing to different outfits, and I wrote to this Notre Dame Pontifical Catechetical Institute, which was
Mm,
founded by Monsignor Eugene Cavan. I don't know if you ever
mm-hmm.
heard of him, but
I'm not super familiar with him. No.
he was um, a great scholar on Augustine. He taught at the
Mm-hmm.
Catholic University of America. He had a major battle with them when Humanae Vitae came out, and he left because they were accepting it. They were rejecting Humanae Vitae,
Rejecting.
and
Okay.
he wouldn't hear of it. So I got in touch with him to get some of his booklets. Then he told me about
Mm-hmm.
Father Friedman. And I was living in Poughkeepsie, New York, which was 2 hours north of New York City. I'd go down there once a month. We would talk. He had the manuscript
Yeah.
of Jewish Identity, Father Friedman's book. And he had a whole
Mm-hmm.
bunch of intellectual Catholics. And I would go down there just to listen and share
Yeah.
in what they were doing. And it was through Monsignor Cavan that I finally made contact with Father Friedman. And in 1993, he asked me to take over the development of the AHC.
Wow.
Well, I was a year away from getting my IBM pension. I'd worked for
Mm-hmm.
them for 30 years. And so between Social Security and my pension, I said I can live. And
Mm,
the rest is history. Now, I didn't know anything. I said to Father, I says,
right.
I'm a programmer for IBM, techno guy. I
Right.
was in management for a while, but I said, I know nothing about organizations. He says,
Mm-hmm.
God will show you. God will lead you. And now he has every step of the
Right.
way. We needed to
Amen.
publish books. We needed an accounting system. We needed database development. I've had to learn all of it and do it. And we didn't have any money and we still don't have money to hire people. So
Yeah.
I had to do it. So
Yeah.
that's where we are.
What was so his father well, sorry, the name of the priest from Notre Dame is Father Cavan?
Monsignor Eugene Cavan, Kevane.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
wrote a book called The Lord of History, which we
Okay.
published also. We started our own publishing company, the Miriam Press. That's the
Very
first
nice.
Hebrew Catholic publishing company in the history of the church.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, besides Father, were there any other sort of particular points within your journey to Catholicism that were influential? Because I mean, at this point, you'd become a Christian, but you weren't particularly Catholic. Was it just over time through going to these talks with the Association of Hebrew Catholics that you started to realize? Like, was there
No, no,
what
no,
was the
no.
point that you
Oh,
realized you were going
when
to
did
be
I become
Catholic?
Catholic? Well, I said in 1979, I think it was in August, I had my
Hmm.
experience in my office at IBM that I just
Hmm.
mentioned, where
Right.
I was ready to commit suicide and God came. I started studying at the Franciscan monastery in Beacon, New York.
Hmm.
And in February of 1979 so how did I know the Catholic Church? And I didn't, because there's
Right.
thousands and thousands of Christian churches.
Yep.
And I had already had a conversion from pro-abortion to pro-life
Hmm.
before I had my experience with God, because I
Okay.
came to the realization you can't defend pro-abortion. And
Right.
it was the pro-life chapter I belonged to. The chaplain was a Church of the Nazarene.
Mm.
Meanwhile, I had started going to Baptist church for my children's sake with my wife.
Yeah.
And so he's Baptist. And they disagreed on fundamental points of doctrine. And I says,
Hmm.
there's tens of thousands of Protestant churches. How am I going to ever figure out? These guys all went to seminary. They all have learning. How am I going to
Yeah.
figure out in the years I have left where the truth lies?
Yep.
And about 2 or 3 weeks after I was baptized, I woke up in the morning, and again, no credit to me, I knew the answer. And I turned
Mm.
to my wife and I says, I know the answer. She says, what's the question? I says, what church did Jesus Christ establish? She says, what's the answer? I said, the Catholic Church. She says, where do you get that from? I says, I don't know. I just know it. That's it.
That's great.
So early 79, I knew it was Catholic, and then I continued my
Okay.
studies. And
Okay. Wow.
so it wasn't my effort to become Catholic or to
Right.
even know that there was a God. God did the whole thing.
Right. Helped out a lot, it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, within the Association of Hebrew Catholics, since '79, in your own experience, what have been some of the greatest challenges to something like the association? Because it is a smaller niche group.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is.
what are the greater difficulties, other than, of course, running the management, but being a particularly uh, Hebraic or Jewish Catholic community? Are there any specific challenges that come with that?
Oh yeah, lots. Besides the fact that we don't have any money to do anything
Right.
with, we do a lot of stuff. I mean, we have Facebook group now. We publish a journal called the Hebrew Catholic, which comes
Hmm.
out 2 to 4 times a year. It's all on our website. We have a website. So all these things I consider some type of accomplishment because I had
Right.
to learn how to do it, and we did it. But the real challenge is not the technical work.
Hmm.
That's not hard to do. The challenge is people. There's a
Mm.
change. We're in a historical period now since Vatican II, where the
Yeah.
church is positively, definitively dealing with the historical record between Catholics and Jews
Right.
and the anti-Semitism that has prevailed.
Hmm.
And so we're stuck between the ultra liberals, Catholics, who think it doesn't
Yeah.
matter what you believe, everybody's going to heaven,
Hmm.
or the ultra traditionalist Catholics who say once you're baptized, being a Jew makes no difference, and the Jews as a people have rejected Christ.
Right.
Well, we're stuck between these two, and they creates a lot of hostility. The
Mm.
other way where we're stuck is the Orthodox Jews don't like us because our witness draws Jews to us, Jews
Right.
to the Catholic Church. And that doesn't fit well with the Catholic Jewish dialogue. They want to talk to each other, but no one wants to, no conversion is possible. That's forbidden.
Right. Yeah,
So
that's
we're
too
between
dangerous.
groups. And like when we had a conference here in 2010, when Archbishop Burke he's the one who invited us to St. Louis.
Okay.
And we had the conference here, and the local papers really did a number on us, as did the Orthodox community, for what we were saying. You can't be a Catholic and a Jew. It's
Yeah.
impossible. So my last name is Moss, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I have a son and a daughter, my daughter gets married to someone else and changes her last name. Is she no longer
Yeah.
my daughter? So I'm a Jew and I became Catholic. Am I
Right.
no longer a Jew? I mean, that's my family. That's who my
Right.
parents were. I'm part of the family.
Yeah.
So there's all these kinds of issues, and it's really a time in history when the church is reevaluating and trying to figure out what does it mean that the Jews are still in covenant with God when we have the new covenant in
Right.
Christ. What does that
Yeah.
mean? What is it? And I explained a little bit about the Seder, but we could talk about all the holidays like that and the
Right.
prayers and the other things.
Well, we can get into it. The question then is, I guess, how do you navigate where certainly you believe in the fulfillment of the everlasting
Yeah,
covenant with Christ, all
right.
that. So how do you guys navigate living that, but then also fulfilling your Jewish heritage as well with these feasts? Is it more a matter of just like you do all of it, and then that's not
I mean,
something all it's not something all Catholics have to live up to. It's something that you, as a Jew, like the Jewish Catholics, there's this special heritage that you have.
right.
So what? Yeah, I guess how do you navigate that,
It's all in the
or do you
light.
even have to?
What?
It's all in the light of Christ.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we do. First of all, we know that the obligation to live
Mm-hmm.
by the laws, it's no longer obligatory in Christ. But
Right.
that doesn't mean you can't live them. I mean,
Yeah.
a person celebrates, let's take Seder, the Passover Seder. There's an obligation to do that in Jewish law.
Mm-hmm.
There's no obligation, obviously, to do that. In fact, many people are against it as a
Right.
Catholic. So we have to do the both. We do them both. We do Easter and Lent and the whole thing, and we do Passover. We just do them. But it's up to
Right.
the individual, because just like in Catholicism, you have all degrees of observance.
Yeah.
Some people saunter into Mass once a month. Some people go every single
Yeah.
day. Well, once a
Yep.
month is not good. But
Mm-hmm.
the point is the same thing as the Jewish community. You have very Orthodox, which are a minority in the Jewish community. Then you have more secular Jews. Even the
Yeah.
secular Jews who don't follow the law and don't do all these things, but they're still part of the family. They're
Right.
they're still a member of the Jewish family. So how do we navigate it? That's part of our work, is to find the practical suggestions, practical guidelines. So on
Yeah.
our website, we have a Passover Seder booklet that we put together. We have for
Mm-hmm.
Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, for Sukkot. And we
Yeah.
do all of these things in the light of Christ. In other words, these things aren't done apart from Christ. They're done in Christ, with Christ.
Yeah.
So he becomes part of the celebration. So we're
Right.
not throwing Jesus out because we're doing something Jewish. Jesus was a
Right.
Jew. We're doing what he
Mm-hmm.
would have done,
Right.
and the apostles and all of the rest of them.
Yeah.
So
Well, even that you get to the early church too, and you have
right,
the whole conflict where you have all the Gentiles coming in, and then there's a question of circumcision where they have to get
right,
circumcised, and they make the decision, but that's for the Gentiles
that's right.
where they don't have the special calling, but the Jewish people who had converted, they still had this sense of living out this calling in a specific
Oh, sure,
vocation within the church.
sure,
Um, but I guess it's been so long since then. Now we've had 2,000 years of history that the Jewish minority has been kind of subsumed in a lot of ways, but there's still this. Again, it's not even obligatory; you don't have to. But I think, especially in the times we live, there is that witness to understanding our Jewish roots, and having
right,
a community like that, I think, is hugely important.
right.
And you have, I mean, how would you guys distinguish yourselves from something like the Anglican ordinariate? Because you have that where you have the Anglicans who convert to Catholicism, but they
Right.
they get to keep these traditions of the Anglican rite and the
Right.
Anglican
And
order.
not only that, but they become an established, recognized entity
Yeah.
within the Catholic Church, the ordinariate.
Right.
We started working with a canon lawyer to establish a legal entity, legal status within the church.
Yeah.
And we had to stop it. And the reason we had to stop it is because we do not have leadership to follow me. Our members are all scattered all over the world. They're thin.
Yeah.
And so we're not together in a physical community. And
Right.
our meetings are haphazard over Zoom or email or things like that. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but it's not something I can solve. Only God can solve that. He brought me to faith. He can bring my successor. When we have leadership that will follow me, then we can proceed with the work of becoming an apostolate of the faithful. That's not Association of the Faithful, which is the lowest legal entity in the church.
Yeah.
But right now we're simply an apostolate, and I'm looking for people to assume the work that Kathleen and I do.
Yeah. Well, for those who are listening to this podcast, check out Association of Hebrew Catholics because it is great work. So hopefully someone listening to this, David, hopefully this is an opportunity for people to hear and you get more of your voice out.
In terms of the conflict you talked about, there is one kind of a conflict that's not an easy one it's easy to resolve, but the people may not feel totally comfortable with it. For instance, we're working with two different calendars. The Jewish calendar is on a different basis than the regular calendar we use, because the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar based on the moon, right? So sometimes what happens is Passover and Easter, like this in 2025, come at the exact same time. And so when one has to give way, the Jewish gives way to Christ. I mean, everything always has. Christ always comes first. He's God, so he has to be first. But that's the only real conflict. And it's difficult because if people are used to doing it on a certain day and they can't do it on that day, it's uncomfortable. But that doesn't happen very often. But other than that, there's really no conflict.
Right. Well, there's one. I was looking through your website, and then I've seen some of your pamphlets, the ones you sent me, and you all speak about this concept of the regime of assimilation. What does that look like in terms of trying to maintain the Jewish identity, the Hebraic identity within the universal church?
Well, I will say two things. Number one, Vatican II overturns that. What it was that a Jew entered the church and he had to adopt to the culture and ways and ways of living and styles of prayer that was dominant in that culture in whatever country they entered the church. And that was typically a culture that developed amongst Gentile members of the church. It wasn't connected to their Jewish heritage. So what happened is they had to assimilate. They had to adopt these other cultures, and their culture was forbidden. I mean, not only not practiced, but it was actually forbidden in many cases. So that meant generations down, they lost the whole sense of who they were, that they were given a vocation by God and they couldn't live it out. That's what the regime of assimilation was. And that was one of the things that the association was formed to fight and to try to end. Interestingly, this is all within God's providence because the church herself addressed that. And the whole question of supersessionism, does the new covenant supersede the old covenant? And the church says, no, it doesn't, except in certain ways. But you don't have to look at them as superseding it or replacing it. It's like the old temple with the sacrifices and the priesthood gave way to the new temple, which is Jesus himself, the sacrifice of the Mass and the old. But that's not necessarily, you don't have to see it as a replacement. You can see it as a development, a fulfillment, a growing from the child to the adult. It takes on new powers, new capabilities, which is true. Judaism is the main ethical values of Judaism is charity and kindliness. Guess what Jesus focuses on in the New Testament?
Right.
That very thing. What's the
Yeah.
second greatest
Seems
commandment?
complementary to
Right.
Christianity. Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So that was the regime of assimilation. But again, we didn't have to do it. The church is already doing it because it's the time. It's the
Yeah.
time.
Well, it's doing it at the top level, and then I think it's up to individual Christians and apostolates and groups like the Association of Hebrew Catholics to inspire that and live it out in a more local, communal way.
Right. And that's
Beyond,
most of our work is at the practical level. We're not theologians. We don't speak for the church, but on a practical basis, there's no objection coming from the church to what we're doing. So we're finding practical solutions to things, and it's working. It's working. Jews in the church and non-Christian Jews are coming into the church, so that's good. And the other big thing is this: we're establishing these small prayer study groups. We call them Havirah. That's a group of, generally it means two people studying Torah and Talmud, but we apply that to our study groups, and they can happen in person or they can happen over Zoom. And they're happening. We have groups slow. Everything is slow because we're so scattered and thin, but it's happening.
Right. It's Havurot. Is that pronunciation?
Yeah. That would be the singular would be Havurah. Havurah.
Okay.
In the plural, you get rid of the last AH and replace it with an OT. Havurot.
Yeah. Well, that just reminds me of the passage from Christ where two are gathered in my name, there I shall also be. Is that where you guys kind of pull from?
Yeah, and that's also quoted in the Old Testament, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. No, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So there's a regime of assimilation, that struggle that had to be overcome. What would you say then? Because on one hand, you have Marcionism, where it's kind of complete sever and break from the Old Testament, but then you also have people who are worried about Judaizing on the other hand. So what's the response for people? Do you ever get accused of like re-Judaizing or anything like that?
We've been accused of that. Judaizing is essentially trying to, and you see this in Acts, trying to have Gentiles follow Jewish law.
Yeah.
As one of the criteria for becoming a Christian, you have to follow Jewish law,
right?
And that's Judaizing. And so they were talking about the Gentiles had to be circumcised, Gentiles had to keep kashrut, the laws of diet, dietary laws. And Acts 15 said, no, that's not true. So we're not Judaizing. I mean, we're keeping the traditions and heritage that we want to keep. That makes sense to us depending upon how we grew up of Jews. But what is it? What is it to be a member of the family? If you have 5 children, one becomes a doctor, one becomes a musician, one becomes an artist, one becomes a crook. They're all members of the same family, but they follow different paths. But the whole issue of the relationship of the situation of Jews in the church is and what that means and the implications of that. That is a hotly debated subject that the theologians are addressing right now. There are lots of books on that subject. If you would follow it, you'd find a tremendous number of books. And there's some really key players. Bram Petrie, you may know him. He's written a number of those books. But he's not writing it from a person who's trying to preserve their own history, their own heritage. He's writing it from a person who's learned about it and sees value in it.
Right.
But there's a lot of people.
Yeah. What would you say then for Catholics who are not of Jewish origin, but there's still an important aspect where I think it's crucial that they understand the Hebraic and Jewish roots of their faith? What are good ways for them to then engage with that? Is beyond just learning about it historically? What ways would you recommend that Catholics actually engage, not just with their Jewish roots, but also with the Jewish community, within the church, outside of the church? What are your recommendations for how a
Those are great
Catholic can do
questions.
that.
We're trying to figure out the answers to that ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still very young,
Yeah.
and the theologians in the church hasn't given us any guidance yet. But there are many priests and many theologians who write about the beauty of the Psalms, the Catholic prayers. Our morning, evening, nighttime, daytime prayers come right out of the Jewish tradition. So there are a lot of prayers and things that they do that we might want to pick up on and learn about. There are people who do Seders, and non-Jewish Catholics can attend the Seder and learn about that. There are many Gentile Catholics who actually celebrate many of these holidays because they're meaningful, but they do it in the light of Christ, not as opposed to Christ, but as a natural part of who Christ is and what he's given us. Christ never denied that we shouldn't do these things. The church has never doctrinally denied it either. So we can learn by getting involved with groups like ours and just reading and learning and talking. We have a Facebook group, and I would say, a third to half of it is non-Jewish Catholics.
Okay.
And
Very
they
nice.
learn, they talk. I mean, it's a do it as you can way right now because we're not that well established yet. But I hope
non-committal though.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, David, I'll include resources below when we post the episode for people for the Association of Hebrew Catholics, any other resources you have. So anyone listening, I recommend that you check them out. But David, it's been an honor having you on. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
And we'd love to have you on some other time in the future.
Great. Good. Okay. Shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom Aleichem. That means peace unto you. And your response would be Alechem Shalom, and unto you.
Alechem Shalom. Amen. Beautiful. Well, thank you, David.
God bless.
If this episode was helpful for you, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a rating and review to help us spread the word, and donating at philosproject.org/give with the comment Catholic to support this podcast. To learn more about becoming a Christian leader in the Near East, check out our Pathfinder free online courses, also on our website. Thanks for listening. See you next week.